Marcus Wellington III had never heard the word no in his 18 years of life. Born into one of the wealthiest families in London, he grew up believing that money could solve any problem and open any door. His father, Marcus Wellington Jr., had built an empire from nothing, starting with a small construction company and turning it into a multinational corporation worth billions. The Wellington Mansion sat on 20 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the heart of Kensington. Marble floors imported from Italy gleamed under crystal chandeliers, while priceless artwork adorned every wall. Marcus III lived in this bubble of luxury, surrounded by servants who catered to his every whim and friends who only stayed close because of his families. Wealth. At 18, Marcus had already crashed 3 luxury cars, been expelled from 2 prestigious private schools, and caused countless scandals that his father's money and influence had quietly covered up. He treated everyone around him like they existed solely for his entertainment or convenience. Waiters, shop clerks, even his own tutors faced his arrogance daily. Marcus Jr. watched his son's behavior with growing concern, but his busy schedule managing the business empire often kept him away from home for weeks at a time. His wife had passed away when Marcus III was only 10, leaving the boy to be raised primarily by nannies and housekeepers who were too afraid of losing their jobs to discipline him properly. The young man's sense of entitlement knew no bounds. He would walk into the most expensive restaurants without reservations and expect tables to be cleared for him immediately. When shopping, he would buy entire store displays just because he could, leaving items scattered on the floor for others to clean up. His Instagram account showcased a lifestyle that made other wealthy teens look modest in comparison. On a crisp autumn morning in October, Marcus III decided to visit central London with his usual group of admirers. These weren't true friends, but rather hangers-on, who laughed at his jokes and agreed with everything he said in exchange for expensive dinners and access to exclusive parties. Today's entourage included James, whose family owned several hotels, Sarah, a model wannabe from a diplomatic family, and Tony, whose father was a prominent judge. They drove into the city in Marcus's latest acquisition, a bright yellow Lamborghini that cost more than most people's homes. The car was completely impractical for London's narrow streets, but that wasn't the point. The point was showing off. It's making a statement that Marcus Wellington III had arrived, and everyone should take notice. Their first stop was Harrods, where Marcus proceeded to buy thousands of pounds worth of clothing he would never wear. He treated the sales staff rudely, snapping his fingers for attention and complaining loudly when they couldn't move fast enough for his liking. His friends recorded everything on their phones, polls, stories that would make their followers green with envy. After shopping, they headed to an exclusive restaurant in Mayfair, where Marcus had made last-minute reservations using his father's name. The staff scrambled to accommodate the Wellington party, even though they were already fully booked. Marcus ordered the most expensive items on the menu, then barely touched his food, claiming it wasn't prepared to his standards. The afternoon continued, with more of the same behavior. At a high-end jewelry store, Marcus bought a watch worth £50,000 without even trying it on, simply because the salesperson mentioned it was their most expensive piece. He left it on the counter, telling them to deliver it to his house, treating the purchase like it was nothing more than buying a newspaper. His friends were impressed, but also slightly uncomfortable with his extreme displays of wealth and rudeness. They had grown up privileged too, but Marcus took everything to another level. Still, they said nothing, enjoying the reflected glamour of being part of his circle. As the day wore on, Marcus grew bored with the usual routine. The thrill of spending money on things he didn't need was wearing thin. He craved something different, something that would give him a bigger rush than simply intimidating shop clerks and restaurant staff. "Let's go see Buckingham Palace," he announced suddenly. "I want to see what all the fuss is about with these royal guards everyone talks about." His friends exchanged glances. They had all heard stories about tourists trying to make the famously stoic guards react, but they usually involved harmless pranks, like telling jokes or making funny faces. With Marcus, they suspected something more extreme was brewing. The yellow Lamborghini roared through London's streets, attracting stares and camera phones at every traffic light. Marcus reveled in the attention, revving the engine unnecessarily and playing music loud enough to be heard blocks away. He felt like the king of the city, untouchable and all-powerful. When they arrived at Buckingham Palace, crowds of tourists were already gathered behind the barriers, taking photos and admiring the iconic building. The royal guards stood at their posts in their famous red uniforms and tall black hats, maintaining perfect posture despite the chaos around them. Marcus studied the guards with interest. He had heard they were trained never to react to anything, no matter how ridiculous or annoying. To him, this sounded like a challenge. It's an opportunity to prove that his money and status could break anyone's resolve. "Watch this," he told his friends, pulling out his phone to record what he was planning. "I'm going to show these toy soldiers what real power looks like." James, Sarah, and Tony felt a chill of unease. They knew Marcus well enough to recognize the gleam in his eye that appeared whenever he was about to do something particularly outrageous. But they also knew better than to try to stop him when he was in this mood. Marcus approached, the barrier separating tourists from the palace grounds. The guard closest to him stood perfectly still, eyes focused straight ahead, rifle at his side. The man looked to be in his 20s, probably not much older than Marcus himself. But there was something in his bearing that spoke of serious training and dedication. For a moment, Marcus just stood there, studying his target. This guard represented everything he had been taught to believe was beneath him. Someone who served others instead of being served, someone who followed orders instead of giving them, someone who earned respect through duty instead of inheriting it through wealth. The crowd around them continued taking pictures and chattering excitedly, completely unaware that they were about to witness something that would change multiple lives forever. Marcus's friends positioned themselves to get the best view, their phones ready to capture whatever was about to happen. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, thick with credit cards and cash. He had withdrawn several £1,000s that morning, partly for shopping, but mostly because he liked the feeling of carrying more money than most people made in months. The guard remained motionless, but Marcus was convinced he could see a flicker of awareness in the man's peripheral vision. This gave him the confidence to proceed with his plan. Certain that he was about to achieve something no other tourist had managed. Little did Marcus know that his father had spent the morning in a series of difficult business meetings, dealing with problems that threatened to cost the company millions. Marcus Jr. was already in a foul mood when his assistant mentioned seeing social media posts about his son's latest shopping spree. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ripple through both families and change the course of Marcus III's life forever. Marcus Wellington III pulled a thick stack of 50-pound notes from his wallet, counting them slowly and deliberately in front of the royal guard. The crisp bills made a satisfying sound as he flicked through them, ensuring everyone nearby could see the impressive amount of money he carried casually in his pocket. "Hey there, toy soldier," Marcus called out loudly, his voice cutting through the murmur of tourist conversations. "I bet you've never seen this much money in your entire life." The guard remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead as his training dictated. His name was Corporal David Mitchell. He had served in Afghanistan before being selected for ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace. He had faced real dangers and life-threatening situations. So dealing with obnoxious tourists was just another part of his job. But Marcus wasn't finished. He stepped closer to the barrier, waving the money in the air like a flag. "Come on, I know you can see this. This is more than you make in 6 months, isn't it?" Other tourists began to notice the commotion, turning their cameras toward Marcus instead of the palace. Some looked uncomfortable with his behavior, while others seemed entertained by the spectacle. A few parents quickly moved their children away from the scene. Marcus's friends watched nervously as he became more animated. They knew this behavior well. He would escalate until he got the reaction he wanted, regardless of the consequences. Sarah tugged on James's sleeve, whispering that maybe they should leave. But James was too fascinated by the unfolding drama to move. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Marcus shouted, his voice growing more demanding. "Don't you know who I am? My family owns half of London." Still, Corporal Mitchell maintained his composure. Though those who looked carefully might have noticed a slight tightening around his eyes, he had dealt with worse situations than this. But something about this particular young man's attitude was especially grating. Marcus decided to raise the stakes. He began throwing individual 50-pound notes toward the guard, letting them flutter to the ground around the man's perfectly polished boots. "There you go, soldier boy. That's probably more than your weekly salary right there." A collective gasp rose from the crowd as tourists realized what was happening. Several people began recording with their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The scene was becoming increasingly surreal. A teenager literally throwing money at one of Britain's most respected ceremonial guards. "Pick it up," Marcus commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. "Go on, bend down and pick up that money. I know you need it more than I do." More bills fluttered through the air as Marcus continued his display. He was completely absorbed in the moment, feeding off the shocked reactions of the crowd and the apparent helplessness of the guard who couldn't respond. "What's wrong?" Marcus taunted, pulling out even more money. "Too proud to take free cash? Let me make it easier for you." He began throwing larger amounts, creating a carpet of currency around the guard's position. The crowd had grown significantly as word spread about the incident. People were pushing forward to get better views, their phones capturing every moment. Marcus loved the attention, feeling like he was putting on the performance of a lifetime. "This is what real power looks like," he announced to his audience, gesturing dramatically. "When you have money like mine, everyone else is just here for your entertainment." Unknown to Marcus, his performance was being broadcast live on several social media platforms. The videos were already being shared thousands of times, with viewers expressing shock and outrage at his behavior. The hashtag #RichBratAttacksGuard began, trending within minutes. One of the viewers was sitting in a corporate boardroom across London. Marcus Wellington Jr. had just finished a particularly difficult meeting when his assistant burst in, tablet in hand, face pale with concern. "Sir," the assistant said carefully, "you need to see this immediately, Marcus." Junior looked at the screen and felt his blood run cold. There was his son, his heir, the future of the Wellington legacy, throwing money at a royal guard like he was feeding pigeons. The comments section was exploding with anger and disgust, with many people calling for boycotts of Wellington Corporation. Back at the palace, Marcus III was reaching the climax of his performance. He had scattered nearly 3,000 pounds around the guard's feet and was growing frustrated that he still hadn't gotten a reaction. "Fine," he declared loudly. "If you won't pick it up, maybe this will get your attention." He pulled out his phone and began taking selfies with the money-covered ground and the stoic guard in the background. In each photo, he made exaggerated faces or rude gestures, treating the entire situation like a comedy show. "This is going straight to Instagram," he announced. "My followers are going to love this. Look, everyone, I just bought myself a royal guard." Corporal Mitchell felt his jaw clench almost imperceptibly. In his years of service, he had been shot at, bombed, and faced genuine life-or-death situations. He had lost friends in combat and seen the worst that humanity could offer. But somehow, as a spoiled teenager's casual cruelty was testing his self-control in ways that enemy fire never had. The crowd was becoming increasingly restless. What had started as curiosity was turning into genuine anger at Marcus's behavior. Several people began shouting for him to stop, calling his actions disrespectful and shameful. "Shut up," Marcus snapped at the protesters. "This is none of your business. I can do whatever I want." He turned back to the guard and made his final, most devastating move, pulling out his entire wallet. He emptied all remaining cash onto the ground, nearly 2,000 pounds more, and then threw the expensive leather wallet itself at the guard's feet. "There," he said with a satisfied smirk. "Now you can buy yourself a real job instead of playing dress-up for tourists." The crowd erupted in angry shouts and boos. Several people began approaching Marcus aggressively, clearly ready to intervene physically. His friends finally snapped out of their shocked trance and rushed to his side, urging him to leave immediately. But Marcus was drunk on the power of the moment. He had never felt so dominant, so in control. The fact that the guard still hadn't reacted only proved his point. Money really could make anyone do anything. even if that thing was standing there and taking abuse. "What are you all so upset about?" he asked the angry crowd mockingly. "I'm being generous. This guy probably makes minimum wage, and I just gave him a year's salary." Meanwhile, across London, Marcus Jr. was already in his car, racing toward Buckingham Palace. His face was dark with fury as he watched his phone blow up with notifications. The Wellington Corporation's stock price was already beginning to drop as news of the incident spread. His assistant was frantically making calls, trying to do damage control, but the story was spreading too fast across too many platforms. Within an hour, major news outlets were picking up the story, and the Wellington family name was being dragged through the mud as Marcus Jr.'s car sped through London traffic. He thought about everything he had worked for over the past 30 years. He had built his empire through hard work, integrity, and respect for others. He had always tried to give back to the community and maintain the family's reputation, and Marcus Wellington Jr. stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his son's humiliating display with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. The man who had built one of Britain's most successful companies from nothing was witnessing his legacy being destroyed by the person he loved most in the world. Marcus III was still performing for the cameras. Completely unaware that his father had arrived, he had moved on to making jokes about the guard's uniform, suggesting that the man looked like a toy that forgot to move, and offering to buy him some real clothes that don't look like a costume. The crowd's anger was reaching a boiling point. Several tourists had begun gathering the scattered money, not to steal it, but to show their disgust at seeing cash treated so carelessly, while many people struggled to make ends meet. A group of veterans in the crowd were particularly incensed, recognizing the guard's service medals and understanding the discipline it took to remain professional under such provocation. "That's enough," shouted an elderly man wearing a military blazer covered in medals. "Show some respect, you spoiled brat." Marcus III spun around, his face flushed with excitement and arrogance. "Respect for what? This is just entertainment. If you don't like it, go watch something else." The old veteran stepped forward, his eyes blazing with indignation. "That guard has served his country with honor. He's seen things you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares. And you're treating him like garbage for your social media followers? So what?" Marcus replied with a shrug. "Everyone has their job. His job is to stand there and look pretty for tourists like me. My job is to spend money and have fun." It was at this moment that Marcus Jr. decided he had seen enough. He pushed through the crowd, his face set in stone, his hands clenched into fists. The closer he got to his son, the more his anger transformed into something cold and calculating. Marcus III was still arguing with the veteran when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Marcus, the single word, spoken in a tone he had never heard from his father before, made the young man freeze. He turned slowly, and his cocky smile began to fade as he saw his father standing there, surrounded by the scattered money and the disgusted faces of the crowd. "Dad?" Marcus III said uncertainly. "What are you doing here?" Marcus Jr. didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around at the scene his son had created. The money covering the ground, the humiliated guards still standing at perfect attention, the crowd of angry tourists recording everything, the palace security approaching cautiously. "I came," Marcus Jr. said quietly, "because I received a call telling me that my son was destroying everything. I've worked for my entire life." Marcus III tried to regain his composure, forcing his trademark arrogant smile back onto his face. "Oh, come on, Dad. It's just a bit of fun. These people are overreacting." "Fun?" Marcus Jr.'s voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone nearby could hear it clearly. "You call humiliating a man who has served his country fun? He's just doing his job," Marcus III said dismissively. "And I'm doing mine, being rich and entertaining people." The slap came so fast that nobody saw it coming, including Marcus III himself. The sound echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot, and for a moment, absolute silence fell over the crowd. Marcus III staggered backward, his hand flying to his cheek, staring at his father in complete shock. In 18 years, his father had never raised a hand to him. He had never even raised his voice significantly. "Your job," Marcus Jr. said, his voice now carrying clearly to every person in the crowd, was to learn honor, respect, and responsibility. And I have failed completely in teaching you those things. The crowd began to murmur, sensing that something significant was happening. Phones that had been recording Marcus III's antics were now focused on his father. Waiting to see what would happen next, Marcus Jr. knelt down and began picking up the scattered money, carefully collecting each bill. The symbolism wasn't lost on the crowd, the billionaire father, humbling himself to clean up his son's mess. "Dad, what are you doing?" Marcus III hissed, looking around nervously at all the cameras. "People are watching." "Good," Marcus Jr. replied without looking up. "Let them watch." When he had collected all the money, Marcus Jr. walked over to Corporal Mitchell, who was still standing at perfect attention despite everything that had happened. "Corporal Mitchell," Marcus Jr. said, somehow knowing the guard's name despite never having met him, "I apologize for my son's behavior. This money was thrown at you as an insult, but I'd like you to have it as an apology." For the first time since the ordeal began, the guard moved slightly, turning his head just enough to make eye contact with Marcus Jr. "Sir," Corporal Mitchell said quietly, "I cannot accept money while on duty." Marcus Jr. nodded respectfully. "I understand. Then I'll make a donation in your regiment's name to the military charity of your choice. Would that be acceptable?" The guard gave an almost imperceptible nod. "That would be very much appreciated, sir." Marcus Jr. turned back to his son, who was watching the exchange with growing panic. For the first time in his life, Marcus III was beginning to understand that his father's money and influence might not be able to fix this situation. "You want to know what your job is?" Marcus Jr. asked his son, his voice carrying to every corner of the crowd. "Your job is to learn that money is a tool, not a weapon. Your job is to understand that respect is earned, not bought. Your job is to realize that every person you meet has value, regardless of their bank account." He paused, looking at his son with a mixture of disappointment and determination. "And, since you've failed to learn those lessons in 18 years of privilege, it's time you learned them the hard way." Marcus III felt a chill run down his spine. He knew that tone had heard his father use it in business meetings when he was about to make a decision that would change everything. "What do you mean?" Marcus III asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. Marcus Jr. reached into his own wallet and pulled out a collection of credit cards, keys, and other items. "These are your credit cards. These are the keys to your cars. This is your access card to the family accounts." One by one, he placed them on the ground in front of his son. "As of this moment, you have no access to the family money. No credit cards, no allowance, no trust fund payments." The crowd gasped. Even Marcus's friends, who had been trying to stay invisible during the confrontation, stepped forward in shock. "Dad, you can't be serious," Marcus III said, his voice beginning to shake. "This is just a stupid prank. You can't cut me off over this." "This isn't about a prank," Marcus Jr. replied calmly. "This is about character, and you've shown me today that you have none." He turned to address the crowd. Marcus III stood in stunned silence as his father's words echoed through the courtyard. The reality of his situation was beginning to sink in, but his first instinct was still to fight back with the only weapons he had ever known: arrogance and entitlement. "You can't do this to me," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I'm your son. I'm your heir. The company needs me." Marcus Jr. looked at him with an expression that was somehow both sad and determined. "The company needs someone with integrity, work ethic, and respect for others. Today, you've proven that you possess none of those qualities." The crowd watched in fascination as the drama unfolded. Many were filming, but their attitude had shifted from mockery of Marcus III to admiration for his father's courage in taking such a drastic stand. Marcus III's friends finally found their voices. James stepped forward nervously, clearly uncomfortable but trying to support his friend. "Mr. Wellington." Sir James said respectfully, "Maybe Marcus just made a mistake. Everyone our age does stupid things sometimes." Marcus Jr. turned his attention to the group of young people who had been enabling his son's behavior. "You're absolutely right, James. Young people do make mistakes. But there's a difference between a mistake and a pattern of cruelty. This isn't my son's first incident of treating people badly because he thinks his money makes him superior. Sarah, the aspiring model, tried a different approach. But sir, he's your only child. Surely family is more important than what some strangers think? Family is exactly why I'm doing this, Marcus Jr. replied firmly. A real father doesn't let his child become a monster just because it's easier than teaching difficult lessons. Marcus III felt panic rising in his chest. He had never faced real consequences for his actions before, and the concept was completely foreign to him. His mind raced, trying to find a way out of this situation. Fine, he declared loudly, trying to regain some control. I don't need your money anyway. I have friends who will help me. I have connections. I'm Marcus Wellington. 3 people know who I am. His father nodded slowly. Yes, they do. And after today, they know exactly who you are, as if to emphasize his point. Several people in the crowd began checking their phones. The videos of Marcus's behavior had gone viral on multiple social media platforms. News outlets were already running stories about the spoiled heir's royal guard attack. The Wellington Corporation's stock price continued to drop as investors worried about the company's reputation. Tony, the judge's son, pulled Marcus aside and whispered urgently in his ear, "Dude, this is all over the internet. My dad just texted me. He's furious that I was here. You need to fix this somehow." But Marcus III was too proud and too shocked to listen to reason. Instead, he turned back to his father with renewed defiance. "You think you're teaching me some kind of lesson?" He spat. "All you're showing me is that you never really loved me. If you did, you wouldn't humiliate me in front of all these people." The accusation hit Marcus Jr. hard, and for a moment his resolve wavered. But then he looked at Corporal Mitchell, still standing at his post with perfect dignity, despite the abuse he had endured. And his determination returned. "I love you more than you'll ever understand," Marcus Jr. said quietly. "That's exactly why I'm doing this. The man you've become isn't worthy of love, respect, or the Wellington name. But the man you could become still is." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This contains the address of a homeless shelter and several job placement agencies. It also has the phone number of a counselor who specializes in helping people overcome entitlement issues." Marcus III stared at the envelope like it was poisonous. "I'm not going to some shelter like a common beggar." "Then you'll sleep on the street," his father replied calmly. "The choice is yours." The crowd was beginning to disperse as palace security moved in to restore order. But many people lingered, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. Several veterans had approached Corporal Mitchell's position and were standing at informal attention, showing solidarity with their fellow servicemen. Marcus III looked around desperately. Finally understanding that this wasn't a bluff or a temporary punishment, his father was serious about cutting him off completely. "My cars," he said weakly. "At least let me have one of my cars." "The cars are registered to the company," Marcus Jr. replied. "They never belonged to you." "The house? My room? My things?" "You have 1 hour to pack a single suitcase with personal items. Everything else stays." The finality in his father's voice broke through Marcus III's denial. For the first time since childhood, he began to cry, not the manipulative tears he had used to get his way as a child, genuine sobs of fear and confusion. "Dad, please," he begged. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I was just showing off. Please don't do this to me." Marcus Jr. felt his heart breaking as he watched his sons break down. But he forced himself to stay strong. "I'm not doing this to you, Marcus. I'm doing this for you. And for every person you've hurt with your cruelty." He turned to address Corporal Mitchell one final time. "Corporal, I want to personally thank you for your service and your professionalism today. You've shown more honor in the past hour than my son has shown in his entire life." The guard gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, and Marcus Jr. could see a hint of respect in the man's eyes. As Marcus Jr. began to walk away, his son ran after him, grabbing his arm desperately. "What am I supposed to do?" Marcus III cried. "I don't know how to live without money. I don't know how to do anything." His father paused and looked back at him with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Then you'll learn," And maybe, if you're lucky, you'll discover who you really are underneath all that privilege and arrogance. Marcus III watched helplessly as his father disappeared into the crowd. His friends had already started backing away, suddenly remembering urgent appointments elsewhere. The reality of his situation was beginning to hit him like a physical blow. He was 18 years old, had never held a job, had never paid a bill, had never even made his own bed. He had no money, no transportation, nowhere to sleep, and no idea how to survive in the real world. For the first time in his life, Marcus Wellington III was completely and utterly alone. The scattered money had been collected by palace security, and the crowd had mostly dispersed, but a few people remained. Watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt, he could hear whispers and see people pointing at him, recognizing him from the viral videos that were still spreading across the internet, as 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Buckingham Palace. And Marcus Wellington III was discovering what real life looked like for the first time. The homeless shelter his father had directed him to was a harsh awakening to a world he never knew existed. St. Mary's shelter sat in a rough part of East London. Far from the pristine neighborhoods where Marcus had spent his entire life, the building was old and worn, the peeling paint and the constant smell of disinfectant, mixed with unwashed bodies and desperation. On his first night, Marcus had stood outside the shelter for 2 hours, too proud to walk through the doors. He had spent those hours on a bench in the cold October air, clutching his single suitcase and watching people come and go. Eventually, hunger and the dropping temperature forced him inside. The intake process was humiliating for someone who had never had to explain his circumstances to anyone. A tired social worker named Helen Head listened to his story with the weary expression of someone who had heard every excuse and sob story imaginable. "So, your father cut you off because you threw money at a royal guard?" Helen asked, pen poised over her paperwork. "It wasn't just about that," Marcus had muttered, still unable to fully accept responsibility for his actions. He overreacted to everything. Helen had given him a look that said she'd heard variations of this story countless times before. "Well, regardless of the details, you're here now. Let me explain the rules." The rules were simple, but devastating to Marcus's sense of self-importance. Everyone had chores. Everyone followed a strict schedule. Everyone treated each other with respect, regardless of their background. There were no exceptions, no special privileges, no way to buy your way out of responsibilities. Marcus's first roommate was a man named Eddie, a former construction worker who had lost his job and apartment after a workplace injury left him unable to work for several months. Eddie was in his 50s, weathered and practical, with no patience for Marcus's initial complaints about the accommodations. "This ain't the Ritz, boy," Eddie had said bluntly on Marcus's first night as the young man complained about the thin mattress and scratchy blankets. "You don't like it? There's the door." The first week was a nightmare. Marcus had never cleaned anything in his life, never cooked a meal, never done laundry. Simple tasks that other people took for granted became monumental challenges. He burned soup, turned his white clothes pink in the washing machine, and managed to flood the bathroom while trying to clean. The other residents watched his struggles with a mixture of amusement and irritation. Some recognized him from the viral videos and took pleasure in seeing the spoiled rich boy brought down to their level. Others simply found his incompetence frustrating when it affected shared spaces and resources. But slowly, very slowly, things began to change. It started with an elderly woman named Dorothy, who had been living at the shelter for 6 months after losing her pension savings to a financial scam. She was in her 70s, frail but dignified, and she watched Marcus's struggles without judgment. On his 4th day, when Marcus was sitting alone at dinner, frustrated tears running down his face as he tried to eat the unfamiliar institutional food, Dorothy quietly sat beside him, first time being hungry. "I guess," she said gently. Marcus nodded. Ashamed to admit it, but unable to lie to this kind woman. "I grew up during the war," Dorothy continued. "We ate anything we could find and were grateful for it. You'll learn to appreciate food differently now." She was right. By the end of the first week, Marcus was cleaning his plate at every meal. No longer able to afford the luxury of being picky about taste or presentation, the job search was even more humbling than shelter life. Marcus had never written a resume, never interviewed for a position, never even filled out an application. The employment counselor his father had recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Patricia, was brutally honest about his prospects. You have no work experience, no marketable skills, and thanks to those videos, a reputation that precedes you, Patricia told him during their first meeting. Most employers who recognize your name won't want the negative publicity of hiring you. But I went to expensive schools, Marcus protested. I had private tutors. I must be qualified for something. Patricia raised. 6 months after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus Wellington III was a completely different person. The transformation hadn't been quick or easy, but it had been thorough and genuine. The night janitor job had led to other opportunities. Carol had recommended him for a day shift position with a commercial cleaning company, which paid better and offered more regular hours. Marcus's reputation as a reliable worker began to spread in the small community of service industry employees. He had moved out of the homeless shelter after 3 months, finding a tiny studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood. It was nothing like the mansion he had grown up in. Just one room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely big enough to stand in, and windows that looked out onto a busy street instead of manicured gardens. But it was his. He paid the rent with money he had earned through his own labor. Every piece of furniture, every dish, every item of clothing had been carefully budgeted and purchased with wages from jobs where he showed up every day and worked hard. The physical changes were obvious to anyone who had known him before. His soft hands were now calloused from manual labor. His pale complexion had been replaced by the healthy color of someone who spent time outdoors. His designer clothes had been traded for practical work gear that could handle stains and wear. But the internal changes ran much deeper. Marcus had learned to find satisfaction in work well done. Rather than in showing off wealth, he had discovered the pleasure of earning respect through reliability and kindness, rather than demanding it through intimidation. He had developed real friendships with people who knew nothing about his family's money and liked him for who he was becoming. His relationship with Eddie had evolved from reluctant roommates to genuine friendship. The older man had become a mentor, teaching Marcus's practical life skills and sharing hard-won wisdom about surviving setbacks and maintaining dignity in difficult circumstances. Dorothy had also played a crucial role in his transformation. Her gentle guidance had helped Marcus understand empathy and compassion. When she finally found permanent housing through a government program, Marcus had helped her move and continued to visit regularly, bringing groceries and companionship. The biggest test of Marcus's change came on a cold February morning when he encountered someone from his old life. He was walking to work early, carrying his cleaning supplies and wearing his company uniform, when he heard a familiar voice call his name, Marcus Wellington. He turned to see Sarah, the aspiring model who had been part of his entourage that day at the palace. She was stepping out of an expensive car, dressed in designer clothes and looking exactly as she had 6 months earlier. For a moment, Marcus felt a familiar pang of shame and inadequacy. Here was someone from his old world, seeing him in his work clothes, carrying cleaning supplies, obviously struggling financially, but the feeling passed quickly, replaced by something he had never experienced before: pride in his honest work and the person he was becoming. "Hello, Sarah," he said calmly. She stared at him in shock, taking in his appearance and obvious circumstances. "Oh my God, Marcus. Is this really what you're doing now? Cleaning buildings?" "Yes," he replied simply. "It's honest work, and I'm good at it." Sarah's expression mixed pity with uncomfortable curiosity. "But surely your father? I mean, this can't be permanent, right? This is just until you two work things out." Marcus shook his head. "This is my life now, and I'm happier than I've ever been." The statement surprised him with its truth. Despite having less money than he'd ever imagined possible, despite living in a tiny apartment and working physically demanding jobs, He was genuinely content in a way he had never been during his privileged youth. Sarah looked confused and slightly disturbed by his response. But you had everything. Money, cars, freedom to do whatever you wanted. How can this be better? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I had things, but I didn't have character. I had money, but I didn't have respect. Real respect. I had freedom to do anything, but I never did anything meaningful. He paused, looking at the cleaning supplies in his hands. These hands have worked hard for every penny I've earned.